The Simpsons. Once one of America's most controversial families, has now become one of America's most beloved families. In an October 1st, 1990 interview with People magazine, then First Lady Barbara Bush went as far to say America needs to be a lot more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons, and also called the Simpsons, quote, one of the dumbest things she had ever seen. In another instance, America didn't agree, however. In season 2 of The Simpsons, which began on October 11th, 1990, the show averaged just under 25 million viewers. Some episodes pulled as many as 33.5 million viewers and beat out a cultural behemoth and direct competitor to the show in the form of The Cosby Show. Rating successes were just one part of The Simpsons' success. A plethora of guest stars and well constructed plots and storylines, which even included some of those guest stars, were an integral part of The Simpsons' success. One of the plot lines of one of the episodes included Michael Jackson appearing as a guy who was instituted and believed that he was Michael Jackson and even sang like Michael Jackson, like thought he was Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson even made an uncredited guest star appearance on the show. And it wasn't until years later that it was found out that Michael Jackson appeared on the show and played the Instituted Man. Different plot lines and different well constructed storylines are what made The Simpsons a big part of American culture in the 1990s and a must watch TV show. The Simpsons really found their niche within the changing times in the US throughout the 1990s and became part of a zeitgeist and sort of one that they was in their own making. Even though ratings fell in the late 1990s, they plateaued at around 15 million viewers, which when you consider is still pretty good no matter what the time is. And they later received a boost in season 9. However, during that season, there was an episode called The Principal and the Pauper, where Principal Skinner was revealed to be an imposter. So the real Principal Skinner wasn't him. It was a man who he had gotten mixed up with during the Vietnam War, which he had served in. And Principal Skinner, who many fans and people who watched the show had believed to be Principal Skinner, the Principal Skinner that they thought was real wasn't the Principal Skinner that was actually real. It was a man he got mixed up with in the army. This received a lot of hate and it was a big controversy for many fans and critics back in season 9, and people really criticized it for the fact that it kind of fluctuated the continuity that the show had built up to that point until season 9. People were obviously loved the characters Homer and Bart and Marge and Mr. Burns and Principal Skinner, whatnot, and it just felt like that episode was a turning point for the 21st century to where nothing was off the table, and they could come up with these different stories and ruin the continuity and be in favor of adding something realistic and out of left field as an attempt to mix things up. And this really sparked something for critics, for fans, and also marked a turn in The Simpsons as well. Um, so yeah, this marked the beginning of where The Simpsons would go in the 21st century. The Simpsons began to rely on more crude jokes, more like gross out humor, more like jokes revolving swearing, different like Bart acting out, and characters really started to act more like themselves, like in a way that was almost like a self-parody in some ways. Homer, who in the 90s, his character was more so a lovable idiot, if you will. And in the 21st century, his character started to turn into just simply kind of an idiot, as many people put it, not to be harsh. But many people considered the Homer character kind of moving more of an idiot route and more so like the angry father sort of stereotype that was part of his character but also not. And it just seemed like a lot of the stereotypes about the characters, they sort of started to fall into it and they lost their depth. And with it, some of the storylines and plot lines and continuity seem to lose their depth as well. One of the episodes that was a big point of contention for its continuity was an episode called That 90s Show. It was an episode where the heating went out in the Simpsons house, so Marge and Homer told the kids about how they met back in college back in the 90s. Now, bear in mind, in the 90s, this is when The Simpsons came out, and this is when The Simpsons experienced their most success. So, how could the show that was the 90s show go back and now explain how the main characters were going through college and leading up to the point where the kids were born and all this, like, and living through the 90s as college students before they had a family, when in the 90s, like, they had a family and they're, for many critics and for many fans, this was just absolutely confusing because it really, in many ways, it ruined the nature of how Homer and Marge met. It was basically doing a complete retcon of the way they met and just a really integral part of the show. And while it is a cartoon and cartoons generally don't rely on realism, that is one thing that separated The Simpsons from other cartoons is that it felt real. You could see Homer and you could see kind of a hardworking father who sometimes falls up short, but he loves his kids, he loves his wife. Or you see Bart, kind of a boy who acts out everyone, does stupid stunts and that kind of thing, and boys will be boys kind of thing, but means well and has a kind heart. And Marge, a house that lack of a better term, a housewife who looks to do things and really cares for her family, but wants to like go out and do things for herself, and kind of reflects like how women were changing during the 1990s and whatnot. Some of these things just didn't seem to carry on as the show carried on, and it just seemed like the characters were falling victim to their own selves in some ways. Another problem was that the show became reliant on a lot of guest stars. There was one episode called Lisa Goes Gaga, which came out in the early 2010s, where the episode really focuses heavily on Lady Gaga, doesn't really focus on the characters. There's a little bit about Lisa, and it just seems like the whole town, while Lady Gaga is a very stunning performer, it just seemed like the whole town was captivated by Lady Gaga and just kind of like lost like what was going on within the Simpsons world, and like everything just kind of, the tone and feel and flow of it was very weird and almost kind of awkward, to the point where it almost felt like an episode where it was Lady Gaga and Lisa and not the Simpsons and Lady Gaga and that kind of thing. It very awkward, and it wasn't like instances in the 90s where you had Michael Jackson coming on to the show and doing an uncredited guest star appearance where he appeared as, like I said, an institutionalized man who thought he was Michael Jackson, sung like Michael Jackson, acted like Michael Jackson, and interacted with the characters, with Homer, with Bart, writing a song for Lisa for her birthday and that kind of thing. It was just didn't have that same fit into it. It just didn't feel natural, and really kind of marked how far The Simpsons had come from where they were at one point. There have been other instances, such as episodes called The Book Job and Barthood, which do a good job at referencing cultural pieces, but not necessarily making it completely about the episode. There was, like with The Book Job, it references Ocean's 11, but there's still like a reference to ghostwriters and that kind of thing for children's books. And it's a brilliant social commentary in some ways, while also referencing a certain cultural work. And then Barthood, which references boyhood and kind of shows Bart growing up and that kind of thing, and really is an interesting piece and has some depth to it and kind of has that classic Simpsons flair to it. But ultimately, it's hard to come up with new things after 30 years, 30 plus years. It's hard. And there's some episodes like Holidays of Future Past, which give a glimpse kind of to what The Simpsons might look like if the show had decided to age the characters or do something like that. And they've done many episodes where they've gone to the future, but this one stuck out more because it went in depth of what the characters would do years into the future when they're adults and not just kids going to Springfield Elementary School. And it was interesting to see. And it almost poses the question of what if the characters had aged past a certain point? What if after season 9 or even after season 8, instead of pulling something like The Principal and the Pauper, where the real Principal Skinner is revealed, instead of doing that, they had aged the characters and started to age the characters? Because then that would have introduced more plot lines, that would have introduced more depth to the characters, different challenges, different things. Really open the show up to new possibilities besides a lot of the ones they've been almost stuck in, just with the characters not really aging and staying in the same town. Heaven knows, for many fans, The Simpsons have practically been all over the world, every continent now, and it's really been overdone. Like episodes like that have been overdone, and cultural references have been done and done and done and done. So after 30 years, it's interesting to think, like, should the characters age? Should the show even end? Like, the show was just recently renewed for its 31st and 32nd seasons, so it's not going to go anywhere. And especially it's not going to go anywhere given its rating success. It still pulls 4 million viewers on Fox alone, which is an amazing statistic in this day and age of streaming, where a lot of people just aren't, and cord cutting, where people just aren't tuning in to TV anymore. So The Simpsons is still a very viable brand, and ultimately, I think that The Simpsons is just going to keep going on and on and on and on until they can't anymore, until one of the voice actors has an issue, or heaven forbid, or they just don't want to do it anymore. They just want to put it to an end. But how do you end a series like that? And ultimately, no matter what may happen with the show artistically, what may happen with the show, it's going to continue onward, and it's always going to be a viable part of American TV culture and pop culture. And I don't think you can ever change that. So